Welcome back to One Piece Explained. Chapter 1111 leaves us off on another crazy cliffhanger before a 3-week break, but it feels like so much happened. In this breakdown, I'll be talking about the particular significance of the Sun God to the Giants, some potential new applications of Haki, whether the Iron Giant is an ally or a new opponent, and much, much more. But really quick, if you've enjoyed any of my videos, such as the in-depth live-action breakdowns, the weekly manga breakdowns, or more recently, my breakdowns of the anime adaptation of Monsters, I would really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps to support me and grow the channel, and you'll also be able to get my videos as soon as they come out. Now with that said, let's get into chapter 1111, Sun's Shield. We start off the chapter checking in on Mars, who we last saw flying into the Frontier Dome. As expected, the laser defenses of the barrier did not do too much to the Elder, as he appears to be on the inside without much of a scratch. Now, in every other instance of a character going through the barrier, we only ever saw a simple explosion, but here, we see the black lightning that we often see associated with Haki, and it's present even after we see him appear, sparking out of his body. This could be a sign that Mars has regenerated his body after taking the damage from the barrier, as we also saw similar sparks of lightning emit from Saturn's body when regenerating after taking the damage from Kuma's punch. And while we've been wondering for a while now if Saturn and the Elders actually have Haki or not, or if there's something else going on, we do get some explicit confirmation from Jinbei in this chapter that he is indeed sensing Haki, and we see Workery use Conqueror's Haki as well later in the chapter. Because of this, it seems possible that some of the curious abilities the Elders have could be the products of Haki in some form. When Saturn and the rest of the Elders were being summoned, we did see some black lightning involved, and in the last chapter it seemed like their very bodies were being formed out of the lightning itself. So could there be some application of armament or Conqueror's Haki where you can use your very spirit or will to materialize your body and keep it intact? In the last breakdown, I pointed out that the black lightning seems to be coming from the sky itself, which is something that we may have actually seen before. Recall toward the end of Wano, when Shanks was able to send bolts of Conqueror's Haki across the sky from the sea surrounding Wano toward the outskirts of the flower capital. From this, we know it's possible to use Conqueror's Haki across very long distances. It's not totally clear if Ryokugi was able to understand Shanks' message, but at the very least he understood his intent. With all of this, we might be on the verge of learning that Conqueror's Haki can be used to transmit not only information, but people as well. There's long been speculation over how Shanks is able to travel large distances and appear at the right place at the right time, such as when he was able to arrive at Marineford after having just clashed with Kaido on the day prior. It would be pretty wild to learn that Shanks and the 5 Elders have such great mastery of Haki that they can use it to travel large distances. Now, enough of that speculation, let's get back to the chapter. Lucci is still standing after taking Zoro's Huhuva spot hunt technique in the last chapter, but Jinbei prevents the fight from continuing and creates some distance between them with a new technique, the 5,000 brick chop. This seems to be a variation of the 5,000 brick fist, which was first seen used against the jailer beasts in Impel Down, but here he seems to have used it on the ground for the shockwave to create some cover to allow them to escape. We see Lucci as he reverts back to his normal form, and it's really cool to see the Hagoromo slowly fade away, as we've only ever seen a character lose their awakened state on screen back when Luffy was fighting Kaido. Now, much to his surprise, Mars appears before him, and so we get a status update on a few characters that we haven't heard from in a while. Lucci reveals a black transponder snail used for wiretapping, explaining how he is privy to the plans of the Straw Hats. He reports that York is still in the control room and that the various Cypher Pole agents are in the basement alongside the Seraphim as we saw before. Mars commends Lucci on his efforts, proving once again how capable of a Cypher Pole agent he really is. Not only was he able to occupy Zoro for so long, but he also managed to keep tabs on all of the enemy's plans. He requests Kaku's safety, but Mars explains that he can't promise anything, maintaining the stance that we've seen of all those beneath them being insects, much like we saw from Saturn earlier in the arc when Doberman was concerned about the safety of Lucci and the other Cypher Pole agents. Now, Lucci envisions Kaku laid out and resting, but we know he's actually trapped inside a bubble ball, which may in fact keep him safe from whatever Mars is looking to do, since the bubbles are just like the bubble shields that we've seen used by the Mark III Pacifista, who can use them as an ultimate defense. Now, Mars takes off towards the lab, and we see what looks like electricity or lightning crackle around him. This could be a hint of Mars' specific abilities, and throughout this chapter we get to see more from Workery and Saturn's power sets, so I'm excited to see what Mars can actually do. Oh, of note, Lucci does not make any mention of Stussy, so her whereabouts are still unknown. It didn't seem like she was with the Straw Hats from the last few times we've checked in on them, so I wonder if she's still in the lab alongside York and Kaku. He also mentions that they have only 6 minutes left before Vegapunk's message, meaning only a minute has passed since the Elders arrived on Egghead in the last chapter, and now. A fair chunk of action happens from this point onward though, so I'm interested to see how far we get through the timer in the next chapter. Also, Hattori has returned. We haven't seen him since 1091 when Lucci tried to assassinate Vegapunk. Now, Hattori is always taken off screen when things get kicked into action, so I've been hoping he'd have some greater role in this arc, but at this point I guess not. There's a theory that involves Hattori being an informant from Morgan's in some form, so maybe that's still on the table. Over at the center of the Fabio phase, Dory and Brogy finally get to catch up with Luffy, and we get some interesting insight into the culture of Elbaf. We've long suspected Elbaf to be polytheistic, as evidenced by Brogy thanking the gods of Elbaf when he found Dory to be alive. So far, we've learned about the god of war, and there have been various hints that they worship the sun god as well, as we've seen with their Winter Solstice Festival and their reaction to Pandora, whom Mother Carmel presented as the sun god. But Brogy's words here confirm to us that the sun god is held in high regard in their culture. Also a fun detail, Brogy holds Luffy here just as Carmel held the quote-unquote sun god back during Big Mom's flashback, and as Dory held Luffy back on Little Garden. Now, the giants seem to recognize the sun god from his appearance, and Vegapunk had commented on Luffy's appearance as the warrior in white earlier in this arc, and talked about how this god was only mentioned in ancient texts, which he may have learned about from his time studying at O'Hara's library on Elbaf. Now, one thing of note that's always been interesting to me is that the giants of Elbaf have only ever referred to it as the sun god, but never explicitly by name as Nika. Even when Workery later asks if the giants are aware of who Luffy actually is, they just express that he's their friend. So the only people who have ever mentioned Nika specifically have included the Buccaneers, who passed the legend down along generations, the 5 elders, who seem to be aware of the true history of the world, Who's Who only came across it when imprisoned, and of course, Vegapunk. I have to wonder if the giants are perhaps not aware of Nika's name and only know him as the sun god. It's been theorized that various cultures around the world all believe in the sun god in some form, but not all of them know all of the details. For example, Bonnie and the Buccaneers seem to have known about Nika as the sun god and knew about his rubber-like body and abilities, but they didn't know what he looked like. Bonnie even pointed out how Luffy was all white in his bounty poster, but never made the connection that he was Nika until she heard the rhythm her father had told her about. Contrast that to the giants of Elbaf, who immediately recognized Luffy as the sun god based on his appearance, and Vegapunk, having spent time with both the giants of Elbaf and the last remaining bearers of Buccaneer culture, may have been able to piece everything together. Saturn and Workery are troubled that the giants have come to Luffy's aid, and Dory compares them to the giant beasts on Elbaf. We saw some of these animals earlier in this arc when the Kid Pirates came across a huge fish, and also during Big Mom's flashback when we saw a similar fish and an even bigger walrus. There's also something fun about how Luffy spent 2 years training against oversized animals on Rusukaina, almost as if in preparation for the elders, who are massive themselves. Now, Dory mentions that they ran into Sanji on their way here, which is pretty cool to see them interacting given that they only met for the brief moments at the very end of Little Garden, and we get a new map with everyone's locations, and if we weren't certain about it just yet, Vegapunk looks to be dead given how Oda has depicted him with his eyes crossed out. Dory pulls out a horn and signals to the crew around the island that their mission is done and it's time to leave. This shot of giant silhouettes celebrating in flames around the island is very reminiscent of the depiction of the giant warrior pirates that we saw when Mr. 3 was explaining their history. We see 2 giants attacking marine ships, and these 2 look to be the same ones that we saw during the brief flashback Dory and Brogy had on Little Garden. These designs are pretty much identical here, and I had speculated that the one with the striped shirt may have been shooting arrows at marine ships in the previous chapter. Workery, however, does not intend on letting him get away, and instead delivers a devastating roar that shakes the very island itself, and even blows away several parts of Luffy's body and clothes, including his eyes, parts of his shorts, his sandals, his straw hat, his white Hagoromo, and even the scars off his chest and face. Now, marine soldiers all around the island start losing consciousness as we learn that this is indeed Conqueror's Haki. We've seen Haki used like this before to some extent, such as when Big Mom's scream was accompanied with her monstrous Conqueror's Haki. In fact, we actually used to see Conqueror's Haki manifest alongside yelling quite often before we even really knew what it was, though this instance seems to be a much more potent conscious usage of it. Workery then lunges forward, spinning toward the giants, much like we saw Saturn do a few chapters ago, and then he strikes them with his inner set of tusks, which looks to have now turned into blades. This ability is very similar to the power of the Dice fruit as we saw with Dad's bones. We know Vegapunk was able to recreate the Dice fruit's ability with his green blood, so I wonder if this is a technique that is inherent to Workery's monstrous form, or if it was something granted to him through modifications. The giants block this technique using their shields with a move that is named after this fallen, a legendary shield found in Norse mythology that was said to protect the world from the sun's heat, whereas here, this technique is being used to protect the embodiment of the sun itself. They push Mercury back with their shields, using a move named after the Norse word skilja, which means to divide or split. This sends Mercury flying back, and you can even see his little boar hooves in his fiery tail. Saturn debuts a new ability, spitting out little balls of poison that explode. This technique is reminiscent of the snake fruit model King Cobra's ability to spit poison, but is also very similar to the Chloro Ball technique used by Magellan, which featured larger balls of venom that exploded. To counter this, Luffy breaks off a nearby tree and whittles it down with his teeth, forming a baseball bat. With this, he sends the poison right back at the Elders. First and foremost, while many of Luffy's zany moves in Gear 5th are references to classic cartoons of days past, the ones we've seen across these last few chapters can be explicitly found in the 1952 Tom and Jerry short, Fit to be Tied, with Tom hitting Spike with a pair of cymbals and also creating a baseball bat out of a whittled down tree trunk. Now, about the specifics of the logic behind this technique, bouncing back the poison can be seen as just another application of Luffy's ability to bounce back intangible things, as we've seen with him redirecting Kaido's Boro Breath. As far as the helmet, the brush, and the bucket of paint go, these can be understood as simple flourishes for the sake of the reader and Luffy's enjoyment, as they don't really have any impact on the in-universe physics of the technique itself. This is akin to when Luffy pulled goggles out of his hair, or when he punched stars out of Kizaru's head with his star gun. In all of these instances, the stylistic elements have no bearing on the results of the combat, instead only being included for our enjoyment. If Luffy had gone full Toon Force and was able to create anything for any given situation, there would be no need to physically create a baseball bat out of a tree. Instead, he could just conjure a bat just like he conjured the rest of the items. I think this is a great limitation Oda has placed on Luffy's powers, so it doesn't become too convenient, or at the very least, more convenient than his powers already are. It's unclear what color the paint is actually supposed to be. This could perhaps be interpreted as Luffy painting the armament coating onto the bat itself, which could be seen as a nod to the popular joke about how Mihawk's black blade is not actually imbued with Haki and instead just painted on. And of course, the 5 on the bat can be read as Go and the 6 read as Mu, which together would refer to Luffy's Gomu Gomu no Mi, as we've seen Luffy associated with this number throughout the series. And believe it or not, baseball does exist in the world of One Piece, at least to some extent. Oddly enough, we saw it most explicitly with the 2 members of Brokeworks, as Mr. 4 used a 4-ton bat to direct explosive baseballs, and Mr. 9 used 2 metal bats to fight. And in March of 2004, we actually got the animated short Take Aim, the Pirate Baseball King, featuring the Straw Hat Pirates going against the Arlong Pirates, as well as the Game Boy Advanced game One Piece Going Baseball, which featured various teams consisting of groups from across the series. The explosion doesn't seem to have done much, as Saturn, Mercury, and Jupiter all rise once again. Jupiter was actually cut in 3 pieces in the last chapter, and we saw the various parts of his body on the ground across this one. However, it should be noted that Jupiter was missing his black Hagoromo when he went to swallow Luffy, even though he was shown with it when he was digging underneath the ground. There is a possibility that Jupiter may have multiple bodies, and the one we saw get cut up was not his real being. But then again, they may all just be able to regenerate. Luffy and the Giants discuss the troublesome invulnerability, and we learn the Giants have never encountered this kind of ability before, which may suggest that the Elders' supposed immortality isn't necessarily from a devil fruit, but something even older than the Giants. Recall that Dory and Brookie are 160 years old, but have been isolated on Little Garden for 102 years, so while they have been around for a long time, they may not be the best characters to look toward when seeking certain answers. We then check back in on the rest of the crew. Zoro and Jinbei are headed for Nami's group, while it appears Usopp, Lilith, Brook, and what may be Edison or Chopper are trying to push the Sunny off of the bamboo so that they can set sail. Frankie and Bonnie's group, however, are being cut off by the Vice Admirals Pomsky, Guillotine, and Red King, with Sanji closing in as well, and it looks like the crew won't have a clean getaway just yet. Mars approaches the control room and questions York, hoping to find exactly where Vegapunk's message is coming from. Now, we saw this room briefly earlier when the message first started, but it's not totally clear where it is. Also recall that there was a secret place in the lab that York wanted to keep safe, which presumably is the location of the power plant that can generate more Mother Flame. Should this be the case, it would be interesting if that room is the same place where the message is coming from, making it more difficult for the Elders to destroy the source of the message. Recall that York was not sinking, meaning that she would not be aware of Vegapunk's message, just like the rest of the Vegapunks weren't aware of her plot. We also check back in on Kizaru, who strangely is refusing medical treatment and continuing to cover his eyes. There's been a lot of speculation over whether or not he'll turn coat on the Marines, and it feels like there was a better opportunity to do so earlier before he killed Vegapunk. Either way, Oda's really playing this Kizaru plot slowly, and it's going to be interesting to see how he'll fit into things now that the 5 Elders have intervened. Perhaps they won't look upon him as favorably as they did Lucci, who has continued to serve them well despite everything going on. But the 5 Elders may also have bigger things to worry about, as the Iron Giant has now risen from its slumber and is making its way toward what seems to be the center of the Fabrio phase. The chapter ends off on this huge cliffhanger, with it apologizing to Joy Boy. Now, there's a lot of mystery surrounding Joy Boy to begin with. He himself left an apology to the Mermaid Princess for making a promise to Fishman Island, one that would be carried out by someone else in the future, and we also learned that Zunisha was a friend of Joy Boy's and had committed a crime 800 years ago. And the Iron Giant had attacked Mary Joie 200 years ago, which coincides with the time that Fishman discrimination became a big issue. It's hard to exactly make heads or tails of everything, but the base level interpretation we could get from this is that the Iron Giant is here to help Luffy against the Elders, given that we've seen it start up alongside the Drums of Liberation. That said, it does feel like a bit much that we just got the Giants here to help the Straw Hats escape, and now all of a sudden the Iron Giant is going to help even more. It seems a bit overkill. While this is probably the most likely event, it would be interesting if the Iron Giant is actually apologizing for what he's about to do against Luffy. While the Iron Giant did attack Mary Joie, its true intentions were unknown, and as we know, there is a giant straw hat somewhere frozen in Mary Joie. Could this robot actually be an antagonist of Joy Boy in some form? This is just some wild speculation, and I don't know that it will necessarily pan out, but it's quite the cliffhanger to leave us on before a 3-week break. So, with that said, that's everything I wanted to bring up in this chapter. If there's anything that you found interesting and wanted to talk more about, I'd love to read about it in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps to support me and grow the channel. Even though we're on a 3-week break, I have a few videos in mind, so stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.